What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today we're going to be looking at the brand new melee weapon that was added with the Phase 3 update of Season 3 in Battlefield 6, and this is the EOD Bot Arm. Now normally for Battlefield 6, I don't really do deep dives on melee weapons, but this one is a little bit special, and I wanted to show exactly why this is going to be my go-to melee weapon going forward. So without further ado, let's dive right into this with the basic testing that I've done. And the first thing I wanted to point out is in the menu, they do provide a couple stats for the melee weapons. They provide our hit delay in milliseconds as well as our damage value. And the damage value is perfectly accurate, assuming we're looking at hits to the front of the target. If you hit them in the rear, then you do a takedown move, which will be a one-hit kill. But that hit delay value doesn't align with any of the hand testing that I've done, so as far as I can tell, you can pretty much just ignore that value, and I'm going to be sharing the actual values that you experience in-game here. But first, obviously a very important element of meleeing is the range at which you are able to lunge at enemy players with a melee weapon. And it turns out with this, based on all my hand testing, this is identical across all of the melee weapons. I don't have the exact value here, but this is the melee range distance from the front that you can see. And with that covered, now let's move on to that damage comparison. As you can see here, all of the melee weapons aside from the sledgehammer deal the same amount of damage at 35, whereas the sledgehammer deals 60 damage per hit, meaning the sledgehammer is a 2-hit kill, whereas all of the others, including the EOD Bot Arm, are going to be a 3-hit kill to the front. The next stat I wanted to look at is your pre-hit delay. So this is the time it takes from the moment you initiate the attack to the moment you actually get your first hit. And as I said, these don't align with what the menus state. In fact, there is quite a bit of variance here. And interestingly, the EOD Bot Arm is actually the slowest in the melee category at 400 milliseconds, whereas the fastest are going to be the combat knife and the serrated blade. So I did find that to be very interesting. Next, I wanted to test the time between two hits. So from the moment you get one hit marker with your first hit to the moment you get the second hit marker, assuming you're spamming at the maximum rate possible. And as you can see here, the combat knife is going to be the fastest, followed by the ice axe and the serrated blade. Then we've got the EOD Bot Arm at 800 milliseconds, and then finally the sledgehammer is the slowest in this area at 1.1 seconds. And with all of those values combined, we can now get our realistic time to kill potential, assuming we're hitting them in the front. So with the 35 damage weapons, it's going to be a 3-hit kill, whereas it'll be a 2-hit kill for the sledgehammer, of course. And also keep in mind, this value does include that pre-hit delay. So it calculates from the moment you initiate the first attack. And surprisingly, the EOD Bot Arm is actually the slowest when it comes to time to kill at exactly 2 seconds. And that's actually noticeably slower than all of the other melee weapons. So you might be wondering why I've now switched to this as my primary melee weapon. And a big reason behind that is, generally speaking, with melee in this game, you're not running up to somebody in the front and then hitting them 3 times to kill them. Usually, if you're pulling out a melee weapon, it's to do a takedown from the rear, or you're just trying to finish them off. You maybe run out of ammo or something, or you know you've hurt them pretty bad and they just need a one hit with a melee. That's more so what I'm using my melee weapon for against enemy players. And when it comes to doing that takedown, this appears to just be the same for all of them. All of the timings are at least within a margin of a frame or two. So as far as I can tell, takedowns are essentially identical for all melee weapons. And so the next big thing I wanted to look at, and honestly, the thing I use melee weapons for the most is for destroying objects and breaking down walls and opening up new routes, for instance. And when it comes to this, up until the EOD Bot Arm, the sledgehammer was basically your only viable option outside of like thin wooden surfaces like window shutters, for instance. With those, sure, you could break them down with a combat knife or ice axe or serrated blade. But when it comes to actually destroying walls or concrete dividers, for instance, the sledgehammer was your only option until now. Now with the EOD Bot Arm, this can also destroy these surfaces. And so let's look at some comparisons here. And the first thing I wanted to look at is a very common sort of wall that you might want to break down with a melee weapon. And as you can see here with a sledgehammer, it takes 4 hits to destroy each section of this wall as you're going through. And you can take down essentially the entire building this way. But it is quite slow with how much time it takes between each of those big hits. So what does it look like with the EOD Bot Arm against the same building? Well, it turns out it's also a 4-hit kill per section, but we have a noticeably faster swipe speed with this. Remember, our time between 2 hits is 800 milliseconds rather than 1100 milliseconds with the sledgehammer. And that means in these situations where we have to hit something like 4 times, we're doing that very noticeably faster with the EOD Bot Arm. And that's not to mention the recovery time after this. If you're just activating this melee to break down a wall, for instance, usually you're doing so with your gun in your hand. And perhaps there's an enemy on the other side of that wall. So once you hit that with your melee to break it, how quickly can you get your gun up and get shots off against the enemy player? Well, in this case, at least using an assault rifle, this may change on a gun-by-gun basis, but using the SOAR 5.56, from the moment I initiate the melee attack to the moment I'm able to get my gun back up and fire a shot, this is 1.45 seconds with the EOD Bot Arm, and 1.85 seconds with the sledgehammer. So the EOD Bot Arm is about 400 milliseconds faster here, and that definitely makes a big difference because there are many situations where I need to break a wall down and make sure that my gun is up as quickly as possible. And with that, we're not quite done yet. Another use for melee weapons is swapping over to them to get a faster sprint speed. In fact, to get the maximum possible sprint speed in the game at 7.15 meters per second, and that applies to all of the melee weapons aside from the sledgehammer, which will sprint slower at 6.5 meters per second. That's still going to be faster than any gun in the game, but it's very noticeably slower than the other melee weapons, so that's yet another downside to using the sledgehammer. However, just a little reminder in case you guys haven't picked up on this tip in the past from me or from somewhere else, if you're playing support and pull out your defibrillator, or if you're playing engineer and pull out your repair tool, by holding those gadgets in your hand, you actually get the same sprint speed as these melee weapons at 7.15 meters per second, so you don't really need your melee weapon in order to do that if you're playing with those two classes. And it turns out those are the classes I use most, and therefore for me, this wasn't a major factor in me moving over to the EOD Bot Arm. I had no problem using the sledgehammer before, because I would just run around with my defibrillators out. But if you're playing Recon or Assault, you don't have that same option, and therefore your melee weapon is going to be your best bet. So if you want a melee weapon that's capable of breaking down walls, gets your gun up faster than the sledgehammer, and allows you to sprint around the map faster than the sledgehammer, the EOD Bot Arm is an absolute no-brainer now, and it is definitely my go-to melee weapon from here on out. Is it going to be the fastest at killing a player straight up? No, in fact, it's going to be the slowest in that situation, but that is rarely what I actually use a melee weapon for, and so the EOD Bot Arm does exactly what I need it to do, and I'm really happy they added it to the game and gave it some interesting stats here and gave us another option outside of the sledgehammer for breaking down walls. Now with that, this is where I'm curious to hear from you guys in those comments down below. Now that you've seen the breakdown of this and had a bunch of experience, hopefully with these melee weapons, what is your favorite melee weapon to use in Battlefield 6? And do you plan on switching to the EOD Bot Arm? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.